Okay, my friends, my honest opinion, I'm not 100% happy with HDR in this game. Don't get me wrong, just because I'm not 100% happy doesn't mean I'm not happy at all, because HDR in this game can look fantastic. But this game does not support the HDR calibration menu on the PlayStation 5. Regardless of what you set up in this menu, you will always have the same output in terms of maximum peak brightness. The game is purely relying on the HDR settings in the game. And usually I'm not making any comments when a game does not support the HDR calibration menu on a console, but in this case I will. When not even a AAA first-party game supports this HDR calibration menu, what can we expect from other games? Nothing. And there's another reason why I'm a little bit unhappy, and that's because in the standard HDR settings the game would try or like to output up to 4000 candela or nits, in this case almost 4000, in this case we have 3800, and in this case I measured or I analyzed 3200. And if I would crank up those settings to the maximum, to the absolutely maximum, we would see output from almost 10,000 candela or 10,000 nits, and of course that's way too much for any consumer TV nowadays. So before we move on to my recommended settings, just a very quick comment about internal test patterns from games, not just in particular with this game, in overall, okay? Because I found that in 99% of the cases they're absolutely useless, and this counts in this case as well. Just for you to remember, with the standard settings 000, I was able to measure or analyze the maximum peak output from almost 4000 nits. At this very moment, with this test pattern, my analyzer is telling me the game likes to output 1200 nits, which is, compared to the consumer TV, to the LG CX, actually in the range, you know. We just need to do a little bit of changes and then it would fit. But as you have seen, that's not true. So that's why internal test patterns are in 99.99% of the cases useless. Okay, let's move on to my recommended settings, and always keep in mind that those settings are for my LG CX 65-inch. If you're using a complete different TV like a Samsung QLED, those settings will not fit your TV, okay? But feel free to try it. I mean, you can't harm anything. So anyway, what you can see here is brightness -2 and highlights -8. And just have a look here. The maximum peak brightness at the moment from this test screen is just 380 nits, and that's just garbage. Sorry to say this, but that's not right. So I was able to measure on certain locations like this here with this very bright fire 840 nits. On a different location like here with the sun, 700 or almost 800 nits. On another location again almost 800 nits, and here we have something around just 650 candela. So you can see with those settings, and I try to get this up again here, with -2 for brightness and -8 for the highlights, I'm very happy with those settings. Just HGiG from time to time looks a little bit odd. Okay, let me quickly explain what I mean when I'm talking about that HGiG looks a little bit odd from time to time. And I changed my ISO level on the camera a little bit, that's why everything looks probably a little bit darker, but I like to show you this, and I hope my camera can catch this nice sun at the moment. And by the way, again, HDR in this game has very beautiful moments. Crazy good, okay? Maybe not a masterpiece as I hoped, but it is very, very good. Anyway, HGiG at this moment with my recommended settings, and hopefully you can see this. This is just a round ball. Doesn't look like a sun at all. I hope you can see this, that actually HGiG is doing something when I turn it off and on. So there is something happening, but dynamic tone mapping on with exactly the same settings, making the picture much more realistic in terms of how the sun looks like. I mean, to make this very, very clear, I don't know what the intention from the developer, programmer, or whoever designed this was. I can just say that I like dynamic tone mapping on at this very moment much better, because it looks better to me, because this is not just a round ball. It's very hard to see actually where the sun starts, and this is, if you just remember when you look outside, this is more or less the same as you, I mean, no one is looking at the sun, or maybe just once, but you get my point. This is not very realistic in my opinion. There's just something missing, okay? A little bit something missing, and dynamic tone mapping on at this very moment makes the picture just better. I'm not saying that this is all the time, because in many cases, and probably in most of the cases, HGiG is, especially when you play in a darker room, my recommended mode to play this game. I did a lot of testing in terms of HDR with this game, and at some point I just decided, hey, don't care about the values, about the measurements, analysis anymore. Just go and have a look what you like or what you think looks the best to you in terms of settings, and don't look at any values, okay? And I came up with something completely wrong, of course, if we talking about values, but I really like that you try this out and put in the comment section what you think about this. So dynamic tone mapping off, okay, that's the thing where we're starting, and highlights is +10, shadows is 0, and brightness is also 0. And then we have this picture here. Let me just jump back to the time of day here. Let me bring this up again, and this is what I really like. It does look great to me. Yes, you lose a couple of details compared to my recommended settings for HGiG and recommended settings for dynamic tone mapping on, but it does look great. I really have the feeling, I would like to play like this. And just give it a try with dynamic tone mapping on. I mean, you will lose a little bit details again, because of, dynamic tone mapping is trying their best, but it can't do anymore because too much information. We're talking around 7000 candela at the moment, what the game likes to display on the screen, which of course is ridiculous for this OLED TV. But again, do me the favor, I'm well aware of that those settings here with highlights +10, brightness 0, shadow 0 can't be right. But just give it a try and let me know what you think. Last but not least, settings for shadows, and I found that for my environment and for my TV, the shadow setting in the standard setting is actually quite good. But if you play in a very bright room, I would actually recommend to brighten this up a little bit, not too much, because at some point you lose the nice contrast between dark and very bright objects, of course. So +10 is way too much, okay? I would stick below 5, okay, if you have to change this. But my recommendation would be actually leave it to 0. So what I found also, shadow settings does not affect HDR at all. So there's no difference in terms of maximum peak brightness or details or stuff like that, okay? So feel free to change this as you like it. HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on with my recommended settings, brightness -2 and highlights -8. Keep in mind that I would not recommend to use those settings with dynamic tone mapping off, because then you end up with losing a lot of maximum peak brightness, okay? So the main difference between HGiG and DTM on is, as you can see at this very moment, the base brightness, as I call it. So my recommendation is actually, if you play in a dark room, I would use HGiG. Even you end up with a little bit of an odd looking sun from time to time. But if you play in a brighter environment, then I would actually think that dynamic tone mapping on is the right choice for you. I'm still not 100% happy with HDR in this game, especially with HGiG and the, from time to time odd looking sun. But maybe that's because how the game is mastered in HDR, because if it is really mastered in up to 10,000 nits, then there's no surprise to me that we have a disadvantage on consumer TVs like the OLED LG CX, because the HDR range is just up to 700, in best cases 750 candela, and compared to 10,000 nits or 10,000 candela, that's a big difference. Anyway, nevertheless, my recommendation is still the same. HGiG if you play in a very dark room, and dynamic tone mapping on if you play in a brighter room. And if you like to try something new, then do me the favor and try my settings for dynamic tone mapping off. Highlights +10, everything else to 0. I'm really looking forward for the comments. So that's it for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me, and I see you guys next time. Bye.